Hello and welcome to Health and Wellness, your guide to the integrated personal and financial retirement journey for physicians. I'm your host, Michael Swartz, Certified Financial Planner and Master Certified Physician Development Coach. Welcome back to the Health and Wellness Podcast. My name is Michael Swartz, Certified Physician Development Coach and Certified Financial Planner. Today I have a very special guest. She retired in 2024, so less than a year ago. Dr. Sue MacLellan-Tobert is with us today, who's an MD and officially, as of 2 days ago, a professional certified coach through the International Coaching Federation. She is the founder and head physician development coach at Healing Edge LLC, and as we mentioned, retired from medical practice in 2024. If you'd like to find Sue online, she's online at healingedgecoaching.com and hosts a podcast with her husband, which we will talk about in this episode and in the next episode. So with that, Sue, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Michael. I'm delighted to be here today with you.
Well, thank you. And we have a long-standing relationship here, Sue. You were part of the group coaching program, Honoring Onward at Gunderson Health System. As we mentioned, you're a physician development coach, and so with that, I'm just really excited to have you share your story today.
Sure, certainly, yes. Well, I mean, my story begins many, many years ago when I first decided to enter into medicine. And who knows way back then when you're that young, how life is going to unfold. So it's been a fantastic journey. And not always highlights, some lowlights with some good learning experiences in there too. But I originally grew up in Alberta, Canada, and went to medical school at the University of Alberta, and actually met my husband in high school. So we've been married almost 35 plus years now, and went through medical school together, and ended up landing in Rochester at the Mayo Clinic for our subspecialty training. I became a pediatrician and then pediatric cardiologist through that training. And I've been practicing in the Midwest since then, up until last April, 2024. I mean, that's kind of me in a nutshell. But another aspect of my career, kind of a second career for me, began in 2017 when I became aware of physician coaching as a way to support career development and autonomy and to help physicians overcome burnout, some of which I was experiencing at the time. And on that journey through learning about coaching, I've been able to really add to my career experience by becoming a physician development coach, working internally at the health system that I retired from, doing that also for several years. And now I'm out on my own, enjoying it at my own speed, honestly. That's, I think, been something that's been impressed upon me this past year is I'm able to go at my own speed. I don't have to go at light speed anymore, doing tons of things, balancing a career and families. So life is much easier since I retired.
Well, that's exciting. And so for listeners out there, I'm assuming that most will be, still working physicians, thinking about retirement, maybe 5 or 10 years out. I guess when you look back at your story and your timeline, you mentioned some highlights, lowlights, and a really cool detail about you and your husband, Darren, being high school sweethearts. So if you have some advice for some of these folks who have shared a similar life journey as you, where you get into medicine with one expectation, and over the course of your career, things tend to change. The environment changes. You obviously grow as an individual. What were some reflections from your career and your time with your husband and kind of growing up through medicine?
Mhm.
What did you learn along the way?
Yeah. Well, that might be an encyclopedia's worth of information. However, as you're talking about it, I think back to my younger self and I think about what we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. And I was to some degree in this kind of bit of a fantasy land of loving medicine, loving connecting with patients, loving the knowledge, the learning, the application of it, the hands-on experience. And that actually drove me forward for a number of years in my career that that could be my primary focus. And in the olden days in medicine, uh, there was a lot of autonomy that came with that too, being able to make decisions about the pace I wanted my practice to run at, how I wanted to market myself within the community, uh, who who the team members I'm working with are going to be, nursing staff, et cetera. Like there was a lot more choice back then, and I think I really enjoyed and relished that part of medicine. That is what I observed in my training, even back in the 90s. And as that began to shift over the years, I realized that change in decrease in autonomy, a change in my role as a physician really led to some dissatisfaction. Yet I still enjoyed the medicine part of it at all. So you could say that to some degree, I kind of, grew up over time within that. And having witnessed the change in healthcare, especially in the past 5 to 6 years, it's become apparent to me that how one practices as a physician within the healthcare system in the US is vastly different than it was 20 years ago. And you either keep up and change, or you make a paradigm shift. And that's ended up being what I did. Is it was time for me to reflect and honor on my values and say, well, what does Sue need in the moment now? I've been giving to others for years and had some control over that. Now I have less. What do I need in the moment? And once I came to that realization that I kind of needed to practice what I preached as a coach. How can you honor your values in your decision making? Then it became apparent that it was time to set aside that chapter of my life. It was a fantastic 30 plus year chapter, no regrets about it. It took me a while, though, to clue in that I needed to do something different, which was retire from medicine and refire in another way, which is doing coaching.
I'm just feeling a really deep sense of passion here, Sue, with your story, your journey, and you mentioned the piece that we talk about a lot is that agency, and how over the course of a career there could be kind of this steady creeping encroachment on
Yeah.
that, and it may not be intentional. The
No.
healthcare system's not out to get anyone, but at the same time, it does change that relationship that you have with the career, kind of as you mentioned, that altruistic or the ideal of what the expectation is and what was promised
Mhm.
you when you entered medicine versus where you're at today and where
Right.
medicine's at today. So
Right.
if you could, you mentioned in 2017 you started coaching. How did
Mhm.
coaching help you rekindle that sense of agency as you approach retirement?
Well, you could say it took me several years to clue in on that I needed to
Okay.
kind of rekindle my agency. Right? I think as you were talking there, Michael, something popped into my head about um, we don't necessarily have an understanding when we go into our careers that the environment around us can change in such a way that we can't no longer have that same degree of agency. Like I just did not clue into that at all. I was thinking that, and I probably observed it in my more senior mentors and things like that, that their careers seemed to be even flow throughout, and they had a greater degree of control over their environment. So many unexpected things happened that you couldn't have even predicted back when I started in practice. The electronic medical record being a huge part of it, the shifts in government control over healthcare, and how organizations really had to begin to take a more corporate approach to how healthcare was being practiced. The whole shift in moving from individual physician autonomy to teamwork. I mean, those are things that you have to learn on the fly unless you go back and get a degree in something like team coaching. But so, those are just three that kind of pop out to me as I'm thinking here. So I think that as as youngers, we're unprepared for what can be dramatic shifts in our environment, but we need to actually be really aware of it. So what coaching brought forward to me early on is, wow, I need to wake up in my environment a bit more. This angst that I'm feeling around me regarding how I'm practicing does not need to necessarily just happen to me. I still have choice, I still have agency, but it took me a long time to figure out what I wanted that to look like. And then there's, some sadness that comes with that, because if you get to the point of thinking maybe I just need to walk away from this career that I've dedicated my life to, That's a big shift. Like I think you and I have talked about grief before too, right? There's sadness that comes with it. There might be some anticipation and excitement that comes with it. It's one of those both and situations. So many emotions percolate together. Yet we have to remember that as humans, we're well equipped to handle a multitude of emotions at once, and we seem to still rise out of the ashes. So I think when I made the mindset shift to uh, I can have more choice in my life, how do I do that? I need to discover my values and work with them more than I ever have before in my career. Name it to tame it, right? And I need to actually take some action around that, those choices that I believe I have, and be willing to experiment. I think the narrow lane of medical training often keeps us in this pass or fail kind of mode. We either succeed or we don't. Being able to say, actually, I'm just trying it out. There's no hard and fast rules here. I'm just going to experiment. Nobody's going to die. I'm still going to wake up tomorrow. Once I kind of walked through that kind of stepwise approach to what agency could be, then when I got to the point of saying the environment that I'm in right now is no longer tolerable for what I want in my life, it was an easy decision to say, time to set that chapter aside.
Well, there's about 7 or 8 talking points that I would love to dive into with you there, Sue, because you mentioned you found your why first. You developed those values,
Yeah,
but it wasn't before recognizing that there were these underlying elements, the things that a lot of physicians say they have to force themselves to be numb to, just to
right.
practice medicine and live in that really dichotomy world, that very logical thinking in a
Right.
career.
Hmm.
And I'd love if you could take us maybe one step deeper in a bit more of that trial and error, that abstract, that permission to explore again.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah,
as you mentioned, it's so unfamiliar in the professional setting. We almost lose sight of the personal element of our life story
right.
near the end of a career as a physician. So can you talk
Yeah,
a bit more about just that uncertainty and
yeah,
how that felt to start exploring that?
right. I think in our medical training, we get caught up in believing there's only one way to do it, and it needs to be entirely focused on the patient with all of our um, parts of ourselves set aside. In other words, there's an interesting quote from the Mayo brothers along the lines of the only concern that we should have as physicians is the interest of the patient. And I've thought long and hard about that. Maybe back in the 1800s and early 1900s, that might have been true for the Mayo brothers, who were well supported in many other aspects of their life, including having spouses that supported them, their household was taken care of, staff, etc., that could support them in all of their other aspects of life. So, wow, guess what? I can wake up every day and just be concerned about the patient. And the milieu in medicine today has changed. That is actually no longer true. So, despite the fact that it's emblazoned on one of the banners in the Gonda building at Mayo, we have to be very, very careful about that because the piece in that quotation that's missing is we first have to have ourselves in order before we can be 100% concerned about the patient. And that is not taught in medical school. If you ask medical students and residents, what do you know about your values? What are your drivers? What are your intentions in life? Those are yet unexplored. And some of that is with youth, right?
Mhm.
But if we don't have ourselves in order first, how are we actually going to be able to focus 100% on the patient? We can do it pretty well for a number of years, but then things begin to break down. We start to get those burnout phenomena rearing their heads. I'm exhausted. I'm cynical. I can't be told anymore what to do. I'm feeling like an automaton in my day. I'm depersonalized in my interactions. That numbness that you talked to about, so that you referred to. So, I mean, I just put it out there. If anybody's feeling numb and automatic in their day, that is a really big clue to wake up and say, hey, what's in my environment here that I need to be more intentional about? Maybe it's myself. Maybe I need to begin to understand myself better. And that's really where my journey started. Like I was in my 40s when I started to feel like I was waking up from medicine. Uh, And I think I did it pretty well for a number of years, balancing busy life, mom, three kids, being a wife, being a full-time provider, physician. Um, and then my brain, my body, my emotions, my psyche all began to kind of participate in the conversation and say, hey, there's a lot more here, Sue, than just this. And once that awareness happens, then we have to be willing to say, okay, so how do I investigate this next? And I think that's where coaching really helped me. So I advise coaching for anyone. Goodness, there's so much that we can learn about ourselves. And I'm also a big proponent of self-coaching. That doesn't mean like getting into self-help books, stacks 20 high. What it means is be willing to have hard conversations with yourself, and be willing to examine your thoughts at even asking, is this an accurate and true thought that I'm thinking about myself right now? And those are not transformational conversations that we're taught to have very easily. In medicine, we're transactional. I got to do the next
Yeah.
thing. I got to check the next thing off my list. So, there's a lot of content in what I just shared, but I think growing awareness, waking up to yourself, being willing to have hard conversations with yourself, shining a light on what may be really accurate about yourself and some of your habits and behaviors, and then making some intentions and goals about, wow, how could I shake this up a bit and change?
Yeah, I love that, Sue. Yeah, you're speaking from experience. You're speaking from, I'm sure, as a coach and a coachee. And you mentioned even with yourself, you see it in others. And I really want to make a strong point here that coaching is no longer remedial. I think that's it's a very common concept that I heard one physician say, coaching is the last thing before we have permission to fire you. We'll put you in coaching, and then if that doesn't work, we're going to let you go. And this is a generative relationship as
Right.
you mentioned, shining a light on some of these unknowns or unexplored areas that we shut off to over time. And it's this incremental closing off. And
Mm.
you said we sense it. And there's a really awesome book, Permission to Feel by Mark Brackett. And he talks about how emotions are information. And so when that dirty B word comes up, when the burnout starts to set in, and you mentioned the roles of life infringe on our sense of identity, right? You
Mhm.
mentioned being a mother, being a spouse, being a physician, and that's the trifecta of a busy life right there. Coaching comes in and says, "Hold on, guys. Let's rediscover." You mentioned the imagery of a phoenix from the ashes, and I
Mhm.
just see this. It's like a snowfall where it's one flake at a time, but all of a sudden you're buried under 6 to 12 inches of snow, and you
Mhm.
have to bust back out through, and that doesn't happen without some unthawing, right? We have to go through that spring and that summer to really start to grow again. And I'm really excited, Sue, if you can just talk, maybe we'll close out this conversation on the transformational process that you've seen for yourself and for other coaching clients that you've been had the pleasure of working with, and really talk through how we can use coaching to offset burnout in a physician's career. And then we'll use our next conversation to really talk about your retirement transition and the successful transition that you've had too.
Sure. Yeah. First of all, I just want to acknowledge that I believe you called me flaky. So,
Anything but, Sue. Anything but.
no, I like that analogy of you get buried under the snowbank.
Sure.
I think for me, it's almost like I had little mini epiphanies along the way in my journey with coaching that then kind of melded together to really give me a new sense of self. And that whole bit
Hmm.
about personal identity, I appreciate you bringing that up. Um, the I think the first thing that came to mind for me when my very first coaching experience ever was going on a 2-day retreat with the Coach Training Institute in Denver. In the winter, by the way, there were a lot of flakes. And the very first tenet that they shared was that, guess what? You're whole, resourceful, and creative. You're not broken and you don't need fixing. Yet in medicine, I'd gone through my entire career trying to fix people and make things better and improve the situation as part of my way of serving, which actually starts with something must be broken. Therefore, Sue, you can now serve and try and make it better. So you kind of begin to incorporate that into your own self-talk. Yeah, there's parts of me that are big and broken. I just don't have time to look at it, right? But when they shared this idea that actually you're whole, and I began to think of everyone as whole, everyone is resourceful, everyone is creative, it was so energy releasing for me. Like, so I didn't have the weight of the world on me anymore. My teenage daughters were whole, resourceful, and creative. I didn't have to advise them and try and get them to function in my mindset and paradigm because they can figure it out on their own. And that is a really big theme in coaching is that as a coach, you're there to be that thought partner with the person who's already whole, creative, and resourceful. Who knew, right? They're
Yeah,
going to figure it out on their own. So that was the first, I think, refreshing epiphany that I had that made me say, "Oh, there's more here I need to dive into." And I come from a strong faith background, and trying to incorporate that into kind of my whole spirituality paradigm was very important. And I think it fits very nicely for someone who comes from uh, that kind of background. That guess what? Yes, we are creative individuals, and we are
yeah,
beings made here to create in reflecting our creator, right?
yeah.
Wow, what a calling. So once that epiphany occurred, the second one that I distinctly remember was a coach at this retreat saying to me, "Well, Sue, what are your top five values?" And I had done some values work previously. You're going to say the standard thing as a physician, integrity, honesty, yada, yada. But until I actually grew my vocabulary around what values words were, I didn't realize that one of my top values was being a nurturer. And all through my
Mm,
life, that had been what had driven me. And again, name it to tame it, right? Once I said out loud, nurturance is my top value. Sure, the other stuff tucks in there, honesty, integrity, faith, community, connection, etc., communication. But that top value makes it so much easier to drive my decisions. And so when we hear, even in medicine, values-based decision making for our patients, that's the phrase. But the bottom of the iceberg is there's so much more work there to do. Uh, the third epiphany, honestly, Michael, was me asking myself, what if all of my preparation in medicine, all of my practice, my 30 plus years of kind of soaking in healthcare was simply preparation for the next phase and the next chapter? That question, I think it still gives me goosebumps. I think that's a really big and bold question to ask oneself because you'd think, wow, a 30-year career should be sufficient to say, gosh, I checked off a pretty good life. But to say, what if that was just preparation? What's next? That blew my mind. And I thought, I have to explore that. And that just so happened to be a calling to coaching. And that's where I land now. So even walking away from a career of 30 years, I knew I had already set the stage to be successful to do whatever comes next in my way of nurturing in the world. It just so happens to be with my colleagues who might be suffering related to the work that and challenges that they face every day. Um, and I don't say any of this to toot my own horn. I want to be very humble about it. But focusing on what is my identity has allowed me to gain more freedom, more energy, and more time.
Well, that's a powerful positive feedback loop, isn't it?
Yes.
And very different experience maybe than a career in healthcare where it's not that positive feedback loop. It's almost a one-way street of investment and deposits that maybe aren't giving us back quite the same amount of positivity that we had earlier in our career.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, some of the big themes here, Sue, that I heard are having permission to say, "Who am I?" That identity piece, having permission to say, "What do I want?" That
Mhm.
desire piece, and really framing it on a foundation of values and saying, "Why do I want it that way? What are the name it to tame it things that I can do to provide some framework, some clarity, and mine these values out of my experience to
Mm.
prepare me for what's next?" And I think that's a perfect landing point. That's the big question in the health and wellness book is what's next. And so, in this episode, do you have any other recommendations, any other advice for physicians out there who are struggling or even who are advancing in their career and looking to just add some more positivity to their development, professional development as we close out this episode before we
Yeah.
turn our attention to your retirement?
Yeah. Well, Michael, that was a great summary. I appreciate that, what you shared. And I guess my takeaway is Be willing to grow your awareness around who you are. Ask yourself really, really bold questions. Look for epiphanies in your day and ways to just create what you want out of what you have. What's next, the next steps.
Excellent. And I do want one other kind of delineation here too, with those epiphanies and those wake up calls and those hard questions. They're not harsh questions, right? We're not challenging ourselves. We're not punishing ourselves. We're not
Right.
being judgmental with ourselves. We're being curious.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
how powerful is that role of curiosity as opposed to
exactly.
judgment?
Yeah, exactly. We're probably experts at asking ourselves harsh questions, but
Yeah,
switching it up to be bold questions about what's next is a whole different ballgame. Yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you, Sue, for that reflection on your career, your current role as a coach. And again, if anyone's looking to get in touch with Sue MacLellan-Tobert, you can find her at healingedgecoaching.com. Again, Sue, thank you for your time today. I really look forward to our next conversation as
All
well.
right. Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Health and Wellness Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Michael Schwartz, Certified Financial Planner and Master Certified Physician Development Coach. If you're looking for additional resources for integrated physician retirement planning, please visit healthandwellness.com. We'll see you in the next episode.